Okay, Shannon, put us back on the record. Okay, we are back on the record. Mr. Williams?
Your Honor, I would like to take one more testimony from my client to be introduced today, or Exhibit 6.
Mr. Williams, we can't hear you at all. I missed all of what you had to say. Start over,
Okay,
please.
Your Honor, I would like to uh, uh, keep my record open for Mr. Russell's testimony to introduce Exhibit 6.
I thought you already moved introduction of Exhibit 6. Oh, no, I'm sorry. You didn't. Any objection, Mr. Linton, to establish a foundation for this?
Your Honor, I would object on the basis because it's not just a picture. It looks like it's got a lot of hand-drawn notes and everything that are on top of this, which, I mean, at this point, I think we've concluded proof. So to try to introduce a new exhibit would require laying a foundation and testimony and possibly voir dire of the witness. So I would object to its admission.
I'm going to allow the proofs to be reopened. I think this is something that could be helpful to the court. So go ahead, Mr. Williams. Let's hear some testimony from your client, and I'll certainly allow cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Russell, did you prepare Exhibit 6?
Yes, I did.
And is the picture that you made the notes on, is that an aerial picture of your property and also shows Mr. Dack's property?
That's correct.
And you have some measurements from different areas of your property to Mr. Dack's property, is that correct?
That's correct.
How did you obtain those measurements?
I used an instrument that is a electronic device, accurate. I believe the manufacturer states 3 foot accurate within 1,000 yards, and I used that to determine the exact distances between the objects shown in the picture.
And you have different distances between the Dack's property and your barn, is that correct?
That is correct.
And how many yards was that?
From Mr. Dack's house to where my sawmill is located is, as shown on the map, 202 yards to the kiln is 200, and then it would be back to the sawmill. The barn is in a direct line between Mr. Dack's house and the sawmill, and it is a 2-story barn with a large berm built on the back side of it, which is in line with the Dack's house and the sawmill.
And how far is the sawmill from the Dack's property?
It's 202 yards total distance from Mr. Dack's house to the sawmill.
Okay, and do you have any of your sawmill equipment in the barn?
No, I do not.
And the kiln, does that create any noise?
No, that's just an enclosed building that circulates the air within the building to dry the lumber. In fact, that building, the kiln building, is super insulated to keep the heat in it, which is a noise deadening effect also, but there's no noise generated by the kiln.
Now, going up towards the front of the property, you've marked where the Dack's house is that correct?
Yes, I have.
And on the right side of their property in the picture, is that where the fence line's located?
That's correct.
And can you kind of describe to the judge which way the drain goes on this drawing?
Okay, the drain that I had installed, if you look at Mr. Dack's house and you see the figure of 60 yards, which is from his house to the back of the property line, on the right-hand corner of his yard is where I started the drain on my property. And it runs across in front of the barn, and then it circles to the west and goes down to across the driveway to the far left corner of the picture into the swamp area.
And how long is your drain?
The drain would be probably approximately 600 feet plus to go from the corner by the driveway all the way back to where it exits out on ground level.
Yeah, I have no question. I'm moving for it to be admitted.
Mr. Lynn, did you want to voir dire before I rule on the exhibit?
No, Your Honor, no objection.
So I want to make sure I'm clear on these dimensions, Mr. Russell. So starting at the top, I see where it's labeled Dack's house, and I recognize that from the photographs. The distance of 202 yards, that's at the right side. I guess it's more in the middle of the drawing, but it's the, does that run from the house to the front of your kiln?
Yes, that would be the
202
distance from Mr. Dack's house to the front of the kiln. I maybe misspoke before when I said that was the total distance. The sawmill is located 28 yards closer. So it would be 202 yards minus 28, which would be approximately 180 yards from Mr. Dack's house to where the sawmill is located.
And this drain that you've testified to, is this a typical farm drain that farmers put under their fields to drain the groundwater away so that the fields will be dry?
That's correct. It's the, I guess, the nominal 6-inch size perforated drain, and it was installed at the, excuse me, it was installed at the corner of Mr. Dack's property and mine, then runs to the north in front of the barn, and then it swings to the left or back to the west and goes across my driveway to the fields and continues on to the west till it comes out.
Approximately when did you have that drain installed?
I can't say for sure, but I would say it's probably been in there 5 or 6 years at least. And it greatly alleviates the water now in the springtime, because normally when we got a heavy rain, the water from Dack's property would transition out and I would have a flooded area between the barn and Mr. Dack's property where it's noted 35 yards. But now that area stays almost completely dry, even the heavy rains, thanks to that tile carrying the water off.
All right, thank you. I'm going to admit Exhibit 4, but Mr. Linton, if you wish to present additional testimony bearing on the additional that I just let in, you're certainly free to do that.
Okay, Your Honor. So I'll just begin with Mr. Russell here as far as asking him some questions, if I may.
You may.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I just want to make sure. Okay, so Mr. Williams, I guess I want to, or I'm sorry.
You mean Mr. Russell?
Yeah, I meant Mr. Russell. Sorry about that. Mr. Russell, so on your drawing you have here, there is looks like an area that starts from the back of the property line from the decks to the abutting line that says 22 yards where it corner before the barn. Do you see where I'm referring to?
You're referring to the 35-yard measurement that shows the distance from the property line of Mr. Dax to the front of my barn.
Yeah, and so there's a line you've drawn that says 22 yards. It looks like from I assume the point where the
Okay.
property line ends.
The 22-yard reference is from the front of the barn to the back of the barn. That it would be the width of the barn.
Okay, and so the area where the DAC property line is up in front of that barn, is that where the area of the ditch is located that's been at issue with this case?
There was never any ditch there. I don't know what Mr. Dack was referring to, but the 60-yard mark is to the rear of Mr. Dack's property. And from there, it becomes my property, of which I believe one of the exhibit pictures showed that rear view picture.
All right, Mr. Russell, I guess I'm confused. You testified that you had filled in that ditch with wood chips. So now you're saying there was no ditch?
I never stated I filled any ditch in with wood chips. Mr. Dack stated that in his opinion, there was a ditch there that I filled in.
Well, when you were questioned by your attorney as to if that impeded the water flow at all, you said no, it did not. So what wood chips, are you changing your testimony now, or I'm confused?
No, I'm not changing my testimony. My testimony stated, excuse me, my testimony stated that me putting wood chips along the property line was only to cut down on weed growth and that. It would not impede the water flow in any direction, either along the driveway side or the rear of the property.
All right, so you then indicated you installed a tile system, correct? Recently, 4 to 5 years ago?
Yes, I installed a tile to help alleviate the water problem, basically between my barn and Mr. Dack's property line.
Well, wouldn't this water problem have been in existence when you initially bought the property?
Yes, it was.
So you waited all this time until about 4 or 5 years ago to install this tile system?
Yes, that is a low area, and therefore it would collect water. The same as, excuse me, the same as the pictures that Mr. Dack showed on his video camera or whatever it was, showed the 2 pockets of water in his property, and that's because that is also low and fills up with water when it gets rain. It has nothing to do with water being impaired from going off of his property. He simply has 2 low spots that have water in it. And because this is a clay area out here, the water stands until it finally soaks in, which may take 3 or 4 days.
Well, when I questioned you earlier about if the water ran off of your property, you said that it naturally just soaked in, but now you're saying it's clay and it doesn't soak in naturally.
I didn't state that. I said it was clay, and therefore it takes longer to soak in. If you have a soil that's very permanent, the water can go through it quickly, like loam or anything like that. Clay is like a clay bowl, and it takes time for the water to go through it. That's why the water sets between my barn, or did set between my barn and the property line, and why it sets on 2 places on Mr. Dack's, because all 3 of those areas are low, and because it's a clay-based soil out there, it takes time for the water to soak away.
Well, isn't it true that the water that you had installed this tile system for started to pool there because of the modifications you made with the berm and the filling in of that ditch back of the back property.
No, the water accumulation has always been what it has been. I only decided because of my equipment and the yard and that I wanted to get rid of that water. So I put the tile in myself to do that. A side benefit was that the water from Mr. Dax that was running on my property would also be carried away by that tile.
So was that water impeding your business operations?
Would it bother my business operation? No.
I believe you said that you made the change because it was causing a problem with your business.
No, I didn't say it caused a problem with my business. It's just that it's a wet spot and I keep all of that mowed and that as part of the yard, and I didn't want that there.
So looking at this, I guess I'll call it a diagram here, you have the marking of 35 yards, which represents from the DAC property line to the front of your barn. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Didn't you at some point actually fill in that area with an additional 2 to 3 feet, raising it up?
No, it's not raised up. In fact, I don't know whether it shows it doesn't, you don't have the picture, but there's a picture showing across the front of the barn, and it still shows an area that just has wood chips on it because it's still occasionally, if we get a severe amount of rain, water still accumulates there for 3 or 4 days, and then gradually it would drain out through the tile.
So again, looking at your diagram, there's the line that says 22 yards, looks like it comes from the back of the DAC property. And is that from the barn front then, or what? Do you see the line?
The 22 yards is in reference to the width of the barn, from the front of the barn to the back of the barn. So
Okay.
The barn is in fact 66 feet wide. The 35 yards is in reference from the front of the barn to Mr. Dax's property line.
Okay. But the line that has the 22 yards goes up to presumably the property line for the DAC, correct?
No, the 22 yards is only from the front of the barn to the back of the barn.
Okay, well, but if we carry that line forward where it says 35 yards, you see, but on the very left side of the barn, it goes up to where the property line would be, correct?
Right. The 35 yards is in reference to the front of the barn to Mr. Dax's property line.
Okay.
And Mr. Dax's property line runs north and south.
So isn't it true though that that ditch that was along the back of the DAX property line continues the entire length of this drawing all the way to the end of it on the left?
No, there was no and is no such ditch. That's what I keep saying. There's no ditch there because Mr. Dax owns the parcel shown with his house. He owns the parcel next to it to the north, and he owns a parcel next to it to the north. And there's no ditch across those. There's a little low spot in the back of Mr. Dax's property where my 60-yard measurement is. To the left of that, in behind those trees, he has a little wet spot in his yard.
Okay, and then looking along on this drawing, the one that has 202 yards, does that indicate where the driveway is located?
No, my driveway only comes back to my house, which is about halfway back. You'll see to the right of the line I've drawn, my house is there.
So where is the entrance then for people to pick up or to go to the sawmill?
Okay, you come down my driveway and just before my house, it curves to the left on the drawing and goes over to where the sawmill is located.
And I'm sorry,
go ahead.
that's the only mean of ingress or egress for vehicles to come into your sawmill, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So if people were bringing in lumber for you to mill or woodwork, they would have to come in through that entrance, correct?
Right, they come down the driveway and then to the sawmill.
And then after you've completed your work on it, it would then have to go back out past the Dax house on that driveway as well, correct?
That's correct, but again, just for clarification, we're not talking semis or anything like that. We're talking a pickup truck bringing in 3 or 4 logs, or maybe pulling a 12 or 14-foot trailer behind it with 3 or 4 logs on it. We're not talking semis or flatbeds or anything like that.
But all traffic would have to go past the Dax household there.
It would have to come in on my driveway. That's correct, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. No further questions, but I would like to recall Dean Dax.
Certainly. Do you have any follow-up questions for your client, Mr. Williams?
No, I don't, Your Honor.
All right, you may call your client. Mr. Dack, you understand you're still under oath?
No, I didn't do it. Say yes. We didn't hear you.
Yes, Your Honor.
Actually, I did hear him. Go ahead, Mr. Linton.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dack, we have plaintiff's exhibit 6, which has been admitted. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and can you explain, if you look along the very back here at the line abutting the 35 yards, there's a line drawn. What would that line represent to you?
The existing property line?
And you testified earlier about a drainage ditch that was in place when you purchased your residence, correct?
Yes, sir.
Where is that drainage ditch in relation to that line that we just discussed?
It's right on that line.
All right, and so along that drainage ditch yourself, is that the drainage ditch you were discussing as far as Mr. Russell filling in?
Yes, sir.
Did you see it being filled in, or what happened?
Absolutely.
And do you know what was utilized to fill it in?
Wood chips. It was back when he had his tree cutting business, and he brought in truckloads and truckloads of wood chips.
Approximately how deep was that drainage ditch, if you know?
3 to 4 feet. I have a picture across the other properties where the ditch partially still exists. It's kind of hard to see, but he only filled it in right behind my house. The rest of it's still there.
So looking at this diagram here, there's a line that goes, what we just discussed with your property line, and it continues all the way to the page here. Is that what I'm referring?
Correct, and it goes actually all the way down to the next section of property that he owns, and then goes to the wetland that Mr. Russell had tried to drain.
And was that all part of the same drainage ditch?
Yes.
And the drainage ditch not abutting your property, is that still in existence today?
Yes.
So it was only the drainage area that was directly behind your property which was filled in?
Correct.
And you actually did see Mr. Russell fill it in?
Yep, yes. And I watched him fill in front of his barn 3 to 4 feet.
When you say 3 to 4 feet, how do you know that it was filled in that much?
Because it was truckloads and truckloads of wood chips.
All in front of the barn?
All in front of the barn.
And it raised it up to the point where you could determine that there was or how much?
3 to 4 feet.
Was that around the same time that the tile system was installed? Do you know?
I personally never seen a tile put in. This was filled in 2011, probably 2010, because 2011 is when we contacted an attorney to make him stop doing that. But he didn't.
All right. And then in addition on this drawing can you note for the court where we discussed the berm being created that raised the land? Where is that on this diagram?
It's where Mr. Russell has his line 202 yards that runs down his driveway. You can see some dots there where he planted his pine trees at. That section there was raised a couple feet. And then he filled in the ditch across the back of my property, and then also raised the grade in front of his barn, all at the same time over a matter of 4 to 6 months.
What about the logs that were installed that created that berm? Where would that be in reference to this
The
drawing?
logs run right down the property line.
And would that be right by your house, or can you note on the diagram?
Right next to my garage. It runs from the road all the way next to my garage to my back corner property, and then runs across my back property. But like I said, only across my property, not across the properties that I now also own.
And so once the log berm was installed, how high was that compared to your property?
A foot.
All right. And then after all of these modifications were made, is that when you started experiencing the problems with the drainage problems in your yard?
Yes, there were never any problems before that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Questions, Mr. Williams?
Mr. Russell, did you put in 3 or 4 feet of wood chips behind his property between your barn?
Wait, whoa. I didn't say you could call Mr. Russell to testify. I asked you
Okay,
if you had
excuse
any
me.
questions
Okay,
for
I have
Mr.
no further questions of him.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I don't know if the court had any questions before I move it.
I do not.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all the rebuttal I wanted to call.
All right. I don't think I need to hear any more testimony, gentlemen. I think we're ready for arguments. Mr. Williams?
Your Honor, first of all, on our claim, Mr. Dak has removed the signs. On our original claim, I'm basically stating that as long as he's ordered to refrain from putting them up again, then it's the only issue we have is court costs. As far as the zoning issue, the council was trying to raise the issue of whether or not my client was, in addition to milling his own wood, was milling for other farmers or other individuals bringing logs in. First of all, you have farmers at times do a lot of work for other farmers in addition to their own farming operation. I would also point out the case of
Mr. Williams, we couldn't hear that last bit.
I said
you need to.
on my brief, I mentioned the case of Township of Williamston versus Sandwood Ranch LLC. If you read the facts of that case, that was actually a riding stable where the Right to Farm Act came into play, and the riding stable is considered part of the Right to Farm Act. The issue that came up in that case, though, was that the owners of the riding stable had some apartments on the property, and they distinguished between the zoning for the apartments and the riding operation. But I think the carrying over the logic of that case to this case, obviously there's things where are part of a Right to Farm Act operation where the farmer is actually doing things for other farmers or other individuals in addition to doing his own operation. So my contention is that it really is irrelevant whether he had 40% of his business coming onto the property or whether he was doing it all on his own property. The next issue I'm raising, Judge, is that if you look at the pictures 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you'll see that the land slopes onto my client's property. If you look at the exhibit that we just had before you, number 6, my client testified that the water is coming off of the road. The issue is not that my client is pouring water onto his land. The issue is whether he was impeding water from getting off the land. And my contention, first of all, is that putting in wood chips or putting in a 6-inch log does not impede the water flow downward off of his property. In fact, it was pooling on my client's property. And my client did take steps to alleviate the water, not only from his property, but also has the effect of alleviating water from the Dax property. He denies that he put in any 3 or 4 feet of wood chips in front of his barn, and obviously you couldn't even drive through that. But again, it's not like he put topsoil or anything in there to change the elevation of the property. So my contention is that he has not caused any problems for the DAX. He's in fact alleviated problems for the DAX. The issue with the uh, black pipe or black hose that he had there, he was pumping water out towards the fence. And the testimony of Mr. Dax's wife was that the sump pump was actually being drained towards the back of their property. Our contention is that he should not have been draining the water onto my property from that pump. He should have, if anything, drained it back towards the rear end of his property. And that is not a violation or trespass on my client's part. So basically, I'm indicating that I believe the counterclaim should be dismissed.
Thank you. Mr. Linton?
Thank you, Your Honor. First, addressing the defamation claim, they have failed to meet the elements which would be required as far as to show that these statements were outside of the First Amendment protections, and showing that they're false and defamatory. They didn't present any kind of proof to meet those elements to show that these statements were in fact false, leading to any kind of unprivileged communication to a third party or any elements outlined in our brief. In addressing our—
Mr. Linton, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
There's a common connotation to a peeping Tom. Do you acknowledge that?
Well,
that's someone who peeks into people's bedrooms.
Well, but it also could be in the context that they felt he was spying on them and looking through their fence, which they installed specifically to try to prohibit.
I get why they called him a peeping Tom in their sign. I get that. The problem is, isn't there a common connotation that a peeping Tom is in fact someone who is peeking into people's bedrooms, looking into places where intimate activities take place, looking into places where people are in a state of undress?
My bedroom faces.
Well, so I believe that there could be an interpretation in which it is where you have an area which you have an expectation of privacy, in which you've spent the money to install a fence so that you would not have to have Mr. Russell looking at your house or property, and he's going out of his way to get around it by looking through the fence to see what they're doing on their own property.
Can he see onto their property from his property where his barn is, looking to the, I lost the direction, but looking towards there? There's no fence back there, is there?
Well, presumably that he would have to have some kind of binoculars or device to be able to look on that far away. Because
all right, well, you've answered my question. You can continue.
Thank you. Going to our counter complaint, multifaceted. First is a nuisance, which is not necessarily just a zoning violation. We cite the Garfield case, which states compliance with zoning regulations does not ensure that a nuisance will not be found. What we're indicating is that Mr. Russell has been maintaining a nuisance at this particular property, in which, again, we're not sure if it was going residential or agricultural, but assuming the Farming Act was going to be applied to this case, that deals with products that you're growing on your own property and then processing and then selling out to other parties. In this case, we have Mr. Russell, who is actually bringing outside product in to his property, taking orders, customizing mill and woodworking projects for these people, and then shipping it back out So it goes beyond, it goes to an actual commercial business beyond just a standard farming entity. So it would constitute a nuisance because, as testified by the DAX and Mr. Russell, the only means of egress and ingress is that driveway that goes right by their home. In addition, he's also created a nuisance in which the way he came in and altered the landscape of the property. He raised the berm right directly abutting the property line all the way down the length of that driveway of the DAC property line. He then proceeds to fill in the drainage ditch, which was part of the original design.
Mr. Linton, I've got a question. Got a question for you. If indeed Mr. Williams filled a ditch with wood chips, what would happen when water runs into that ditch? Wouldn't those wood chips float?
Your Honor, I believe if it's filled in 3 to 4 feet over time, all the dirt and sedentary that builds up in there would actually just fill it in full. It wouldn't just be a drainage system. It actually would become just filled and not be capable of its purpose, which was to allow water.
If he were filling a ditch for the purpose of keeping water from flowing through it, would you expect he would have done it with wood chips?
Well, I believe it's because he had a tree cutting operation of which he would have accessible. That would be the material he would be able to use easily to fill it in. And as I said, I believe over time, wood chips actually condense and create a block because you have dirt and sediments going through there and then piling up, and essentially it won't drain at all.
Go ahead.
Okay. And I would also proffer that based on the testimony of Mr. Dack, that it was his understanding that this ditch had been in place for some 50 years when this property was originally set up, that they would have a prescriptive easement for that drainage system that Mr. Russell then tampered with. I would just note that it's interesting, Your Honor, that Mr. Russell only filled in the portion directly behind the Dax property. He didn't fill in the remaining part of it, which extended out to the road. He clearly was targeting the Dax by his actions and just filling that portion of it in and raising the berm up as well. Finally, I would just note that regarding the issue of trespass, that I think opposing counsel was taking the testimony of Ms. Dack out of context. Her answer of where that sump pump drain line was in today's position, not when this original event occurred. The event of which Mr. Dack testified dealt with the pipe or drainage tube came up towards the fence line, but was still within his own property. And that he kept coming out and finding that it had been pulled over onto Mr. Russell's property. We would pull it back. Clearly, if you were to take the evidence as a whole, it would seem like Mr. Russell was trying to create an issue that he could then call the police and get the Dacks in trouble. Mr. Dack then testified that their sump pump backed up and flooded their basement, and he found a perfectly milled wooden plug that had been inserted a foot deep into this drain line, which caused the whole system to back up and caused a lot of significant damage to their furnace, their personal property, and other belongings that were in their basement. And they had had no previous problems. It seems incredible to think that we have the neighbor who's a woodworking mill person, and it is a point of contention between the two parties that somehow he's not responsible for inserting this wooden dowel into this drainage pipe that caused all the problems. So I believe that we would meet our threshold under our theory of trespass. And that I would just ask the court to award damages as a result of those actions. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Williams?
No, Your Honor.
All right, gentlemen, I would like to come out and view these properties before I make a decision. Can you tell me how I get there, Mr. Russell?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm located approximately 7 miles south of Eaton Rapids. When you get about 6 miles south of Eden Rapids, the road splits. M50 goes to Jackson. M99 continues basically straight on towards Springport. Then you will come to a road called Harshay, Harshay. You turn to the right or the north. It goes down 100 yards and it ends on Kimler Road. You turn right on Kimler Road, which would be back to the north, and you go approximately 200 to 300 yards, and you will come to my property and Mr. Dack's property. We are the first houses located on the west side of the road as you are going north after you've turned on to Kimler Road.
All right, I'm not sure when I'm going to make it out there. I don't want to cause any alarm. So what I will do is notify the attorneys before I come. I don't want to talk to anybody while I'm there. I don't want anybody to talk to me. I know what I want to look at. I'll probably walk a little bit on both of your properties, and I'll give you a fair warning of when it's going to be. Probably short notice. Let me ask Mr. Russell, I'm assuming you're retired from any kind of outside employment?
That's correct. I would be available almost any time unless I have a doctor's appointment or something.
And Mr. Linton, if I remember correctly, both your clients are currently unemployed?
They were laid off because of the COVID, Your Honor.
Right. All right. I'll just try to coordinate this, hopefully, as soon as I know for sure I'm going to have a window of time to drive out there. And I'll get a hold of counsel. Mr. Williams, what's your phone number?
It's area code 517-663-9000.
And Mr. Linton?
Judge, let me interrupt for a second. If my secretary is kind of working part-time because of COVID, and so if you call the office here and you reach the answering machine, if you leave a message, we get a text message to our cell phones, and I'll call you right back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Linton, what's your number?
I'm just going to give you my cell phone directly. It's 517-449.
Let me stop you for a minute.
Sure.
I'm going to close the proofs and I'm going to stop the live stream. I don't want you giving out your cell phone